Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to say a few words about Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra, the forerunner of our Gharana. In fact, I will try to express my own views and feelings as I knew him or saw him in my student life. Thank you very much. The musician in Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra was known throughout the world, but few people had an opportunity to get acquainted with his profound knowledge of literature and philosophy. I was fortunate enough to have this privilege while I was a student of English literature at Jadavpur University. Since he regarded me as his own grandson, I often called upon him at his residence at Jadavpur Kalibari Lane after my classes. I always found him sitting bare-bodied in front of his house. It is rather surprising that whenever I called upon him, he talked about anything except music, though he knew that I was learning instrumental music from my father. His spontaneous quotations from Chekhov, Hugo, Macaulay, Balzac and Hegel impressed me so much that I listened to his talks with rapt attention. It was he who advised me to read the works of French, German and Russian poets and playwrights. As I was a student of English literature, he told me time and again that unless I knew something about the authors and poets of other countries, my study of literature would remain incomplete. According to him, a genuine student of English literature should also be conversant with French, German and Russian literature. He often discussed the influence of French, German and Russian writers on the literature of England elaborately when he spoke to me. I clearly remember that one day he gave me a detailed account of how Shakespeare was influenced by the legendary Greek dramatist Aeschylus and suggested that I read some works of Aeschylus in connection with my study of Shakespeare's plays. He also had a comprehensive knowledge of Bengali literature and could make specific references to the influence of 19th century British novelists on Bengali literature. His skill in writing poetry was also remarkable, and his poems were greatly appreciated by contemporary poets and critics. Had he become an educationist, he would certainly have occupied a prominent place in the educational institutions of our country. Fine art enthusiasts often remark, half in jest and half in earnest, that a musician is always a gourmet. Radhika Mohan Moitra was no exception. But probably it is not known to all that he was an expert in cookery as well. My grandfather was like an elder sister-in-law to him, and whenever he spoke to her, cookery was one of the main topics of discussion. One afternoon I returned home from school and found Radhika Mohan Moitra reclining on an armchair in our drawing room talking to my grandmother. The subject of discourse was how to cook meat with curd. It was really amazing to hear a virtuoso of his stature explaining the different steps of the recipe as lucidly as any elderly lady skilled in culinary art. The next day, my grandmother instructed her maidservant to cook this item for lunch. She arranged for all the necessary ingredients, came down to the kitchen herself, and explained all the different steps clearly to the maidservant. She supervised the entire operation herself, rebuked the maidservant from time to time for some minor errors, and gave the finishing touch to the item with her own hands. We had this item for our lunch and found it extremely palatable. Immediately after that, my grandmother received a telephone call from Radhika Mohan Moitra. She told him that we had the item suggested by him for our lunch and enjoyed it very much. One afternoon I was studying in my grandmother's bedroom. Suddenly I heard the calling bell ringing. I ran to the balcony and found Radhika Mohan Moitra standing in front of our entrance. When I went downstairs and opened the door, Radhika Mohan Moitra handed a stainless steel container over to me and said, "This is turtle's meat. Give it to your grandfather. He wanted to have it." Then he went out. That night we all parted of the turtle's meat cooked by Radhika Mohan Moitra. It was so delicious that I just could not distinguish it from chicken or mutton. The next day, our calling bell rang at around 7 o'clock in the morning. Our maidservant opened the door and in came Radhika Mohan Moitra with a smiling face. He walked straight into the dining room where my grandfather was having his breakfast. Very soon a humorous gossip began. The two scholars indulged in a small talk on the references to food lovers in English and Bengali literature. Cookery was Radhika Mohan Moitra's favorite pastime. This versatile genius not only invented new rags and instruments, but also performed interesting experiments in culinary art. Buttered chicken and green jackfruit kebab were two palatable recipes that he thought out himself. He may rightly be regarded as a Leonardo da Vinci in the music world of the 20th century India. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On the occasion of the 5th Radhika Mohan Moitra Memorial Conference, two eminent maestros, Pandit Shankar Ghosh and Pandit Kashina Mukherjee, have sent their humble tributes to the departed master. I will just read out their views and feelings as they have expressed in their writings, one after another. Radhika Mohan Moitra by Shankar Ghosh. It was 1952. I had just begun my lessons in tabla at the residence of my Guruji, Pandit Gyalpradar Ghosh. At 15 Dixon Lane, I had left the college without completing my studies. Tabla was my only involvement. Relentless drudgery for 9 to 10 hours a day had started. Everybody considered me to be an unemployed vagabond in the household. At this time, I happened to meet a handsome, dignified gentleman at Guruji's residence. He was gossiping with my Guruji. Having entered the room, I touched his feet. "Who is this boy?" he asked Guruji. "He is a newcomer," said Guruji. "He is picking up the lessons quite well." The gentleman said, "So you want to become a professional drummer? Do your guardians know?" I suddenly got nervous. What sort of an expression was this? Afterwards, Kushumba, singer Kushum Banerjee, told me that he was Pandit Radhika Mohan Moitra. I was about to turn unconscious when I heard the name. One of the top-ranking musicians of that era. Later on, I became very close to him. I started calling him Radhuga. One day, I timidly approached him for a permission to practice on the tabla with him. He said, "Come to my house at 1 p.m. tomorrow." Accordingly, I went to his residence. When I knocked at the door, I heard a stern voice. "Who is there?" As soon as I responded, he said, "Today you are late by 10 minutes. Come tomorrow." He didn't open the door and I came back dejected. The next day, I was rather frightened and reached his house half an hour early. When I knocked at the door, he said, "Still it is 30 minutes to 2 o'clock. I kept standing at the doorsteps. At 2 o'clock, he opened the door and said, "Come in, come to the shop." I could not understand what he meant to say. He said, "Your soap is at 2 o'clock and you must arrive at the stroke of 2. Not a second before or after that." This was my first lesson in professionalism. This had taught me discipline in life. I had my first opportunity to accompany Radhuga on the tabla at Omkar Music Circle in those days. I hired a taxi and went there from my residence. After the concert, the organizer gave me 25 rupees as my remuneration and rupees 10 as my taxi fare. "You boy," he said, "how much is your taxi fare?" My taxi fare is 2 rupees 50 paisa. I timidly replied. Then you return rupees 5 immediately, he said. I was greatly ashamed. The lady who had organized the concert was very well known to Radhika. He was smiling. The lady said to Radhika, why are you teasing a youngster? Such was my relation with Radhika. In 1954, Radhika was invited to perform at Haridas Swami Music Conference in Bombay. I was asked to accompany him. I stood silently in front of him. He said, don't you have decent clothes? Wait a minute. Then he went inside and came back with a 100 rupee note. He gave it to me and said, take this and buy some clothes from the tailor shop. I lend you this money, repay me when you get your remuneration from the organizers in Bombay. Thus he taught me to gain self-confidence. In fact, it was Radhika who first taught me the mathematics of Tehai. Subsequently, it helped me a lot in pursuing rhythmic complexities in course of my recitals. Once I went to Amravati in Madhya Pradesh with Radhika for a concert. Dr. Madan Gopal of Amravati was a great friend of Radhika. The monthly concerts of his music circle was held at his residence. There was a large mattress in a hall on the first floor. I used to sleep on the mattress. Radhika used to sleep on a bed within a mosquito net. His suitcase was kept unlocked under the bed. In this suitcase there was a small bag of tobacco. Radhika used to make cigarettes himself. He was greatly fond of handmade cigarettes, which emitted a charming smell. One day I woke up very early. Radhika was still sleeping. I slowly opened the suitcase, took out the bag of tobacco and was about to take some tobacco out of it when Radhika's voice suddenly came from inside the mosquito net. That's all, that's all. It is enough for one cigarette. Theft is a great art unless you are caught red-handed. My limbs were literally frozen with fear. On one occasion I accompanied Radhika to Mumbai. Radhika said, can you perform for 5 hours at a stretch? That night he played from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning at Ville Parle Music Circle. There was a short recess in between. Those who attended the concert could never forget that performance. It was a rare experience in my life. One day Radhika suddenly said, I shall retire. I was rather surprised and said, Baba, do musicians retire? He said, no, they don't. They are forced to retire by the audience. I do not want that. A commemoration by Pandit Kashinath Mukherjee. Hello sir, I find that you have deviated from your track. Your legs are unsteady. The eminent Sarod player Radhika Mohan Moitra hurled these words at me and stared at my face, eyes expecting a reply. I put down my head in shame. At that time I stayed at Harish Mukherjee Road. Radhika used to reside at Chakrabedia. I had great interest in sports. I was rather badly injured while playing for a football match at Bhavipur. As I was staggering along the road, I happened to meet Radhika. Then he said, alas, what have you done? God has endowed you with a talent for music which few people have. You are learning from a venerable teacher. But instead of pursuing music, you have wounded your legs. I understand that you have made a great reputation as a sportsman. But how long can you keep it up? Till the age of 40 at the most? After that you have to give it up. Why are you destroying yourself? Your talent for music will fetch you success after 40. You can maintain that throughout your lifetime. Music will be the most valuable asset in your life. Today I am about to become an octogenarian, and I realize the inherent meaning of Radhababu's words every moment. He never indulged in rigmaroles. He was always explicit and outspoken. His mental firmness was really remarkable, and uncompromising politeness was the principal trait of his character. He was always straightforward. I have seldom found a benevolent person like him. He never worked with vested interest. He could be extremely resolute if necessary. His heart was a conglomeration of firmness, tenderness, generosity and rectitude. It was like a coconut with a hard outer shell and a delicate kernel inside. Sometimes Radhu Babu was very facetious. Once I went to hear his recital at a concert organized by the well-known singer Shukhendu Goswami. After the concert, it was announced that I would be honored with a gold-studded medal. Radhu Babu called me and said, "Sir, you are not going to receive anything studded with gold, so please be studded yourself. That means, please leave the place." On another occasion, I met Radhu Babu outside a music conference. I found him waiting for a taxi. I offered to give him a lift. He said, "Let us go. If I travel in your car, I need not pay any taxi fare up to Bhabanishankar." At that time, I used to reside at Gadiyahat, but he thought I stayed at Bhabanishankar. When I drove past Bhabanishankar, he anxiously asked, "What are you doing?" In reply to that, I said, "Baba, do you think I shall drop you in the middle of the road? Can I ever do so?" When I dropped him at his residence, he said, "Thank you, Kashi Babu, my taxi fare has been saved." When Radhu Babu was a performing artist, the entire music world of India was influenced by the styles of renowned stalwarts such as Alauddin Khan, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, Pandit Ravi Shankar, etc. But Radhu Babu had a unique personality. He scrupulously maintained a distinctive style of his own and became a conspicuous figure in the music world. I still remember his recital in Rag Bhairavi at a concert in Chetla, South Carolina. That recital inspires me even today. Though I was not his formal disciple, I have learned many valuable lessons from him. I do not hesitate to observe that I ought to have become his disciple after the death of my first teacher, Pandit Srinivas Lal. There are many other remarkable events in his life that deserve special mention, but all these events cannot be narrated in this brief article. I am really happy to pay homage to a virtuoso of his death.